German Foreign Policy 1890 to 1914. On the 28th of June 1914, an Austro-Hungarian prince was assassinated by a Serbian terrorist organization called the Black Hand. This was the fire that led the First World War. But a lot of other events contributed to this beginning of the war. And now we're going back in time to look at these events. But first, I want to talk about the man who has written the document that we've been working with. His name is Manuel Geiss. He was a German historian, a French and English translator. His focus was German history, and he has written a lot of fine documents on German history, not only from German perspective, but also from French and English perspective.
Okay, in 1890, Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany, was dismissed, and after this, the German foreign policy took a drastic turn. Kaiser William II did not agree with Bismarck that Germany was a satisfied power. He wanted Germany to expand and become a world power. And Bismarck's successor was Caprivi. And Weltpolitik was adopted by William II, and it was a break with Bismarck's Germany. The aim for Weltpolitik was to create a global power. In Germany, there had been a rise in population and production, including in German industry like steel, mining, chemical, and electrical. And these achievements of the rising nation pushed the young empire into Weltpolitik. The major decisions in German Weltpolitik was overseas colonies and the building of a large fleet. The building of the large fleet brought long-term profits for the steel industry, but the large sums invested in the expansion of the army practically stacked up till 1912, and by then it was too late to wage a victorious offensive war. Because of the insistence of the Navy, Germany had to adopt a policy of restraint, and Britain reacted to the building of the German fleet by always remaining ahead of the German Navy in numbers, displacement, and caliber of her capital ships. The fleet was a strategical failure for Germany, but also a political liability. It drove Britain away from Germany and into the opposite camp, which was the opposite of what the emperor wanted. In 1897, the Kaiser described Germany's interest for overseas as the logical consequence of what Bismarck and his grandfather had achieved in the field of politics. He linked economic growth with imperialist expansion, and imperial power meant naval power, and they depended on each other, and one could not exist without the other, which William II said in a speech. The demands for German power and prestige increased not only in Europe. Powers without a sufficient share in the world would be relegated to secondary importance.
And then to the Triple Entente. The relationship between Britain, France, and Russia between 1907 and 1917 came to be known as the Triple Entente. The Triple Entente was not so much directed against the Triple Alliance, but rather against Germany and its Weltpolitik. Britain was in a position to veto against any aggression from France or Russia against Germany, and it had become obvious that the powers of the Triple Entente would stand up if Germany were to overstep the line of legitimate protection of existing rights.
Okay, so Germany's political offensive against enlightenment in 1909 to 1912. Well, if you start looking at the German attempts to prevent the formation of the Triple Entente in 1905 to 6 and its consolidation in 1909 have failed, and two German sallies have been rather improvised. So they didn't really have like a specific strategy towards how they were going to handle the situation with the Triple Entente, which they saw as a threat. So a new kind of strategy developed, and it consisted of probing the ring of the Triple Entente in the search for weak points. So in search for weak points, France, Russia, and Britain. The Daily Telegraph affair in 1908 was basically about the Kaiser Wilhelm II broached about Germany's disposition towards Britain, and this was of course met by anger in Germany over the Kaiser's clumsiness. So, and at the same time, they faced like an economic crisis inside Germany. So a domestic crisis was rising at the same time with anti-British feelings in Germany. The Weltpolitik also ran into an impasse, and it caused that the domestic problems were returning more urgently than ever before. So the basic question was actually how Germany's costly expansion was to be financed. Berlow, the chancellor at that time, suggested that the landed aristocracy were to contribute to the rising financial demands by the central government by introducing an income tax and a hereditary tax. So, but of course, the aristocracy refused this. Berlow, whose personal relationship with the Kaiser had been undermined after the telegraph affair, he offered his resignation, and the Kaiser was glad to get rid of him. So in January 1912, the Socialists won a resounding victory after the last pre-war general elections in Germany. The basis of German empire seemed to be threatened within itself, so Billow's successor was Bertman Hauptling. He carried a certain liberal tradition and sympathy for the West, and particularly for Britain and France, without, however, disagreeing with the principles of the Weltpolitik. So his focus was very much on domestic policy inside Germany. The Kaiser recovered sufficient after 1909 and believed that he could use the new Chancellor more or less as a figurehead, but the Chancellor had also his own ideas. So Berthmann's liberal attitude towards SPD plus readiness made him to come to an agreement with Britain, or at least like a more permissible matters. Britain would play a major role in the conflict of countries, so of course, like Berthmann's policy was also mainly to get Britain to stay neutral in this situation. So in a major role in the conflict like of the continent. So he wanted Britain to stay neutral towards Germany. So if the two countries from the other countries from the Triple Entente were to attack Germany, Britain would stay neutral. If they're attacked by either Russia or France, of course. So German wanted like basically a free hand from Britain. But Britain would, of course, not allow this because they meant that it would destroy the balance of power, and it would give a loophole for great German domination throughout Europe.
Then to the Bosnian crisis in 1908. Russia was keen on ensuring that her warship had access from the Black Sea, so the Russian foreign minister met with the Austro-Hungarian foreign minister Arenthal in September 1908. But Arenthal was a bit receptive about his deal because he had another project in mind: the annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. The Young Turks, who just got power, wanted to restore Bosnia. But Arenthal wanted to annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. But in return for the support from Austria-Hungary, did Izvolsky, the Russian foreign minister, agree to the annexation of Bosnia. But Russia stood Austria-Hungary up when she announced the annexation of Bosnia in October 1908. Izvolsky claimed that he was tricked by Anthal and called for an international conference, but Austria-Hungary rejected the call. Germany offered full support when tensions started in January 1909. Turkey demanded compensation, and Serbia threatened war. Russia chose to recognize the annexation of Bosnia in March 1909 in hope of a free passage through the straits, but she was left angry and humiliated. Serbia promised to be a good neighbor, but a secret organization like the Black Hand murdered several of Habsburg's officials in Bosnia. Russia-German relationship worsened rapidly because of Germany's full backing to Austria-Hungary, and Germany felt like she had to support her only ally, Austria-Hungary.
German encirclement. After the Bosnian crisis, a new term in Germany arose called encirclement. This was the idea that Germany was allied with Austria-Hungary alone in the middle of Europe with enemies all around them, such as Russia, France, and United Kingdom. Field Marshal Count Schlieffen wrote an article about this, which highly supported the idea of encirclement. This was also a commonly known term in Germany at this point. This also created the Copenhagen complex, which was fear of an attack from the United Kingdom, such as the bombing of Copenhagen earlier in the 1800s. Still, England wished to remain neutral in a war started by France or Russia against Germany, but Germany could not ensure the neutrality of the United Kingdom. Therefore, it still created more fear of an attack and more fear of encirclement in Germany. Still, Germany's decision to the relations in the Balkan Wars and Weltpolitik only increased the dislike towards Germany in these times. If Germany had chosen to change their foreign policy to a more peaceful one, it's not possible to say whether the result would have been different, but there would have been less dislike towards Germany.
Okay, so the Balkan Wars 1912 to 1913. The German Empire was more powerful in Europe than ever before, and this is based on the ever-increasing economic potential and its army and its rapidly expanding fleet because of the Weltpolitik. So Germany had two allies who, maybe basically hated each other or very much disliked each other, Austria-Hungary and Italy, because of the Balkan crisis. The Kaiser had put his personal prestige into the preservation of the Ottoman Empire, when his political advisors, the Chancellor and the Auswärtigsamt, were more inclined to support Italy, if only to keep the Triple Alliance together. So the First Balkan War broke out in October 1912, and this was basically because Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, and Serbia had achieved independence from Ottoman Empire, but large elements of the ethnic populations remained under Ottoman rule, and therefore they created Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, Serbia. They created the Balkan League, which was an alliance against the Ottoman Empire, because at the time they still controlled much of the Balkan Peninsula. So the League was victorious in the First Balkan War, which broke, where it successfully wrested control of almost all of European Ottoman territories. Following this victory, however, the old difference between the Allies re-emerged over divisions of spoils, particularly in Macedonia, leading to the effective breakup of the League, and soon after, on 16th of June 1913, Bulgaria attacked her Eastwise allies, beginning the Second Balkan War. So, 4 Balkan states defeated the Ottoman Empire in the First War. One of the 4, Bulgaria, was defeated in the Second War. So, the Ottoman Empire lost nearly all of its holdings in Europe, and Austria-Hungary, all through another combat, was weakened as much as enlarged Serbia pushed for union of the South Slavic peoples. The war set a stage for the Balkan Crisis in 1914, which thus was like a prelude to the First World War. You can say it definitely lightens up the fire. And everything seemed at that time to boil over in Europe with the crisis going on, and the political and the economic state of Germany was so strong, so they pushed forward. So, yeah.
In 1912, the British Minister of War Lord Houdain went on a mission to Germany, hoping to end the naval race, but his mission failed. Instead, Germany embarked on a more ambitious naval program, and the Reichstag increased the army by 30%. The Empire and the Kaiser did not support the idea, for they were concerned about the crowns. But after the defeat of the Turks, the army was increased. The number of the officers were increased by 4,000, the non-commissioned officers by 14,900, and the number of the men was increased by 117. And the French people increased their national service from 2 to 3 years, while the Russians planned and expanded their military. The middle class hardly needed any more brainwashing for preparing to go to the war, so they had to use propaganda effort, which was more or less directed to one section of the German society, and these were the less integrated and the people who relied on the ruling class, to be precise, the working class and the SPD. The Germans also had to hold Ally back from the Second Balkan War, and this was mainly because they wanted to stay maximum restrained until the moment came for military action. Until then, it was Russia who had to appear as an internal troublemaker for peace in Europe. And the tension increased between the Russians and the Austrian-Hungarian because the Austrian-Hungarian wanted to create an Albanian as a state. By the end of the time, Austria-Hungary were not so satisfied with the Germans' perspectives. So when the Serbs settled in the northern part of Albania, Germany had to support Austria-Hungary, and in this way, or else it might be a complete loss for Germany if they lose their main ally. Germans and Russians wanted to reconsolidate Turkey after its defeat in 1914. And the Germans did this by increasing their military aid and help in the country. And when the Russians realized this, they started protesting in the German value. But the Germans did not want to go to Russia, but it was still too soon. And Germany succeeded to solve the crisis in 1914. The main reason why Germany didn't want to go to war with Russia was because of the Entente power, and Germany wanted Britain to stay neutral in the war. The Austria-Hungary was suffering at the moment, and so they had to create a kind of a preventive war, and they did this in a manner of offensive and defensive, whereby it was Austria-Hungary against Serbia and Germany against the Russian. And finally, we have the assassination of the Archduke Fernando of Austria-Hungary, and war could be struck from that. At the moment, Germany saw her position in the world threat, and so did the world powers. Germany promised Austria-Hungary full support in whatever measures she took against Serbia, and William II recommended an immediate action against Serbia. And the Austro-Hungarians sent an ultimatum to Serbia, which they rejected, and after that, war was declared.
So all in all, you can see that what really led to the First World War was a mix between change in European politics, different conflicts, different disputes, different decisions being made by not only Germany, but also the surrounding European countries in the period between 1890 to 1914.